Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Captivating Cases in Rabbinic Responsa, our 6-week journey around the world and throughout the ages, listening in on the surprising practical questions your ancestors asked rabbis across Jewish history. Today we will be doing lesson 6, which is titled Forging Forward. We will be exploring futuristic response. I know a lot of you have been looking forward to this lesson. And essentially, just to open up the lesson, until now, we have been asking questions and looking at the way it was dealt with throughout history. Now, we formulated them not in historical order, right? We didn't go chronologically, but we formulated them in a way that we would get an idea for how rabbis answer questions, how questions are asked to rabbis, how rabbis answer them. And we went through this in a 5-lesson process, and we basically concluded. What I'd like to do today is to basically ask the following question. That we believe that the Torah is not something that we try and adapt to the world as much as possible, but rather that the Torah is the blueprint of the world. As a result, if the Torah would be a beautiful Torah that dealt with all sorts of historical cases, which is kind of the way we've been formulating our classes till now, we've been looking at the way Torah has been, always with the has, the past tense verbiage, and we look at the way the Torah has been dealing with all these sorts of issues, then we're kind of basically announcing that the Torah is dead. And of course, we don't believe that. We believe the Torah is alive, very much alive. And so today's lesson, this is the crucial question we're going to be addressing. How is Rabbinic Responsa, which has been the topic of our conversation for 5 weeks, how is it evolving currently with the times? How can this new reality, this new whatever it is, and we'll talk about lots of different topics, a new technology, a new reality in the world, a new frontier, how can that be used in a way that fits, not with the Torah, as in we're trying to adapt to the Torah, but how can it be used to fit with its original intent, with its original purpose? Because that's what we believe. We believe when we use it according to the Torah, we're actually using it according to the way that thing is supposed to be used. And that's the question that really lies at the heart of the response that we're going to be exploring in today's lesson. We have a whole bunch to tackle. And essentially what we're saying is like this. Until now, we've been exploring history. History continues to unfold at every moment. So future generations, in 1,000 years from now, they'll be looking back at the way we are currently handling the current questions or the futuristic questions, and how we wrestled with them and how we came to our conclusions and the mistakes we made along the way, etc. And I think this reminds us that the Torah is a living voice. It's not something we got at Sinai 3,300 and whatever years ago, and then it's been static ever since. It's actually a growing and living organism that continues to inform. It has a certain truth. It has a certain mainstay to it. It does have a certain staticity. Is that the word? I don't know. Staticness to it, but it also has an evolving nature in which it continues to get applied to every single generation. Okay, so that's kind of the goal for today, to realize that new innovations aren't in conflict with Torah, but rather they are waiting to be aligned with it, and we have to figure out how that is. Because for them to be in conflict with the Torah would mean that they have to have a different source, and we don't believe that. We believe that everything finds its source in the Torah. Okay, so how are we going to structure today's lesson? Part 1, which is going to be about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. We're going to go pretty fast-paced through a whole bunch of examples of halacha engaging with emerging innovations, in which we are basically not going to answer that many questions. I'm just going to kind of give you the lay of the land. It's just going to be kind of like an update. I'll treat this as an update. You know, there was recently a rabbinic conference in Woodmere, and I haven't gotten to watching the full talk yet. But one of the major rabbis there gave a talk which was called "The Most Challenging Questions of the Past Year." You know, and he talks about lab-grown meat, and he talks about questions that came up because of the war in Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna attempt to do that for you. I'm gonna attempt to give you like what are the big questions or the big fields that are being dealt with right now. Certainly there are small little fields that are being dealt with and applied all the time, but that's on a singular level. What are like the big horizon questions that everybody is thinking about now that are coming up, that rabbis are going to have to figure out how to deal with it, and they're going to have to follow the system that we've been doing in the past 5 weeks. But we're not going to do a lot of answers. In the second part of today's lesson, we're going to tackle one question specifically, and that is, will AI replace rabbis? A very specific question. What is the role that AI plays when it comes to Torah learning and to this process that we have been discussing, which is piskei dinim, or halachic rulings? All right, sounds like a plan. All right, so let's dive in. The first topic that we are going to discuss is going to be space tourism. So we'll start off with the video, and then we'll dive right into it. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
Space tourism, no longer science fiction, but science fact. Newly minted astronauts include tycoons Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, and celebrities such as actor William Shatner.
I'm Captain James T. Kirk, commanding the Starship Enterprise.
Of Star Trek fame.
The most profound experience.
Two companies, Bezos' Blue Origin and Branson's Virgin Galactic, will rocket you to the edge of space and back. It's a suborbital joyride, 50 to 60 miles above Earth, with a total trip time up and down lasting as little as 11 minutes. Nearly 120 people have launched with the two companies so far.
These are purely civilian flyers in most cases, and you have to call that space tourism.
And doing it for fun.
Yeah, pretty much doing it for fun. You know, you're getting your 4 minutes of weightlessness. You're getting a view of the Earth that only astronauts have ever gotten before.
In 2022, mountaineer Vanessa O'Brien flew to the edge of space with Blue Origin and loved it.
You are able to see something that is so precious. It was seeing that blue marble from above, and it translates into a sense of almost responsibility and an appreciation that we really are all connected, that it is one planet.
Elon Musk's SpaceX offers next-level orbital adventuring. In 2021, billionaire Jared Isaacman financed Inspiration 4, an all-civilian crew of 4. They orbited Earth for 3 days. Another space company, Axiom, has chartered civilians all the way to the International Space Station. Ticket prices are reportedly stratospheric, roughly $500,000 per passenger for an up and down trip.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
Somewhere around $200 million to charter a SpaceX capsule into orbit.
Those up and down suborbital flights have a better chance of, you know, getting down to an affordability level that might appear a bit more reasonable.
Will those flights be more affordable to more people anytime soon?
I do think the prices can get down to the point of an around-the-world cruise, you know, something like that in fairly short order.
So strap yourself in once prices begin to drop. The future of taking a selfie from space is already here.
Okay, so what are the questions that arise if Jews are going to start spending some time in space? Anybody wanna hazard a guess?
When to light Shabbos candles?
Okay, very good. Well,
That's good.
I don't know why you stopped at Shabbos candles. What are the whole Shabbos?
Yeah.
Right? Like how to keep Shabbos in space. That's a good one. Very good.
That's true.
Really, we have to start with a much simpler question, which is a Jew allowed to go to space? In other words, are space flights prohibited due to the Torah's ban on engaging in dangerous activity? And I think that's a question that's probably going to evolve with time. And obviously, anybody who attempts to answer such a question is going to have to go through the 5 steps that we went through over the past 5 weeks. The first thing is that they'll have to analyze, to appreciate where the questioner is coming from. Then they'll have to gather the facts, which I think with this one would probably be the biggest stage, because they'll have to figure out just how dangerous it is to go to space. Definitely, there were multiple astronauts who died on space missions. But with time, I think experience will establish a certain safety, and then we'll be able to move past that. Let's read text 1, shall we? Tova Jane, can you please? It's from Rabbi
What
Levi
page,
Yitzchak.
Rabbi?
We're on page 233. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Halpern. 233. Text 1.
Oh, okay.
Judaism in orbit.
Okay. I'm just looking. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If a Jew is aboard a spacecraft that orbits Earth every 90 minutes, half of each orbit in daylight and half in darkness, completing about 16 orbits in 24 hours, what is the law regarding the observance of mitzvot that are time dependent? The question concerns mitzvot that apply only during the day, such as the morning Shema, or only at night, such as the evening Shema, or mitzvot that apply at specific intervals such as Shabbat and the Jewish festivals. Oh, okay.
Come again?
Am I finished?
Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
I thought you had said something following that. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
You know, it reminds me of the joke that they tell. I'm sure some of you have heard this before. They tell the joke about the first Orthodox Jew to go on a space mission, and they come off, and it's like eight astronauts on the mission, and 7 astronauts come off, and they're hale and they're hearty and they're excited and they're all smiles, and they come off and they're waving at the reporters and the cameras, etc. And the Orthodox Jew is like disheveled. He looks like he hasn't eaten in weeks, and like he's been on the same trip as them, but somehow he looks like he's like gone through the ringer. So one of the reporters walks over to him and says, "Rabbi, why do you look so?" He goes, Shachris mincha ma'ariv, tefillin on, tefillin off. Shachris mincha ma'ariv, tefillin on, tefillin off. Every 90 minutes, all over again, right? This is the question that Rabbi Halpern is bringing up. All the time-bound mitzvot, when you're talking about a time where every 90 minutes you're orbiting the Earth, right? The whole attitude becomes different, and then the question becomes, with regards to something like Shabbos, how do you keep Shabbos? So on page 234, we're giving some examples of approaches that rabbis have taken with regards to this. And actually, there are rabbis who say never. You don't observe Shabbat if you're in outer space. In other words, because you're not experiencing a 24-hour cycle and a seventh. Like, what are you supposed to do? Every 6 90-minute cycles, then the seventh one you do it, or every 6 days, every 6 24-hour periods, and the seventh one you keep Shabbat, but then you're going to be keeping Shabbat at all sorts of weird hours. You know what I mean? Like your kiddush will be made in the middle of the night, like because outside the light, these things are dependent on the light and dark cycles, which leads us actually to the second option, which is every 7th time they experience darkness, they should keep Shabbat for 90 minutes. In other words, every 90 minutes times 6, now you take a break for 90 minutes, which is just an interesting way of looking at things. For starters, I don't understand how you can make a chalent in 90 minutes. Never mind have it ready and eat it. You know, like it's going to be very difficult. I think when Ilan Ramon, who was the first Israeli, I think the first Jew, but definitely the first Israeli to go to space. Unfortunately, he never made it back. When he went to space, he left from Florida, of course, from Cape Canaveral, it's called, right? In the Space and Treasure Coast there, where a friend of mine's dad is the Chabad rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Tzvi Kanakov, and he asked his rabbi, who in turn obviously went to go ask rabbis that are more senior in nature, etc. And the answer that he was given was that he should keep Shabbat based on number 3. When Shabbat is observed in the location, he was given number 5, which is when Shabbat is observed in the place they launched from on Earth. So he kept Shabbat to whatever degree he kept it. I don't think he was religious, but he definitely wanted to be able to understand how to keep Shabbat, and he took a Kiddush cup with him, etc. So he did. He kept Shabbat based on the time that it was in Houston, or in Florida. I'm not sure. One of the two. In any event, number 3 is an interesting one. Maybe since Torah is an earthbound Torah, right? So you have to match the location below them on Earth. This is a very interesting thing. Why? Because you can sometimes be flying, and for a little while you're over areas on Earth where they are keeping Shabbat, but then boom, you enter an area where it's not Shabbat anymore. And then a few minutes later, or a few hours later, you end up over another area where they are keeping Shabbat. So your Shabbat would be very strange. Option number 4 is after 6 24-hour periods from the moment they entered space. The moment they enter space, they start counting 24-hour periods. After 6 24-hour periods, that's when they would keep Shabbat. The reason for this is it's based on a Talmud. So remember, you definitely need to follow the 5 steps that we've been talking about, right? And in lesson 3, one of the things that we spoke about was finding precedent in the Talmud and comparing your instance to whatever the Talmud is discussing. And in the Talmud, there's a discussion about someone who was lost in the desert. So biblically, he doesn't have to keep Shabbat. He doesn't know when Shabbat is. There's no point in keeping Shabbat on a random day. But rabbinically, he's mandated to keep Shabbat alive, to keep the concept of Shabbat alive. So whenever he remembers, and he doesn't know, and there's all discussion about whether he remembers, maybe he remembers at least it's one of these 3 days, right, or whatever. But assuming he doesn't remember at all, then he starts counting. He starts keeping track from now on, and on the 7th day he keeps Shabbat, and he goes through this new cycle until he rejoins society. When he rejoins society, then he can kind of match up again. And the purpose of this is just to keep the spirit of Shabbat, if you want. And I would imagine that's the same. These last 3 are kind of the same idea. Nobody is suggesting that biblically you have to keep Shabbat after 6 random 24-hour periods go by since you left for space. I mean, the day you left for space might have been a random Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So what we are suggesting is that this is keeping the rabbinical concept alive. And the same thing is if you're going to match the launch location, which is what Ilan Ramon was advised to do, or if you're going to match Israel, whenever Israel is keeping Shabbat, that's when you keep Shabbat for those 24 hours.
Question? Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Is there also in the Talmud discussion of if you're on a boat? Because obviously it doesn't go as fast as, being in space, but even in Talmudic times, people would travel, from.
So for the most part, okay. So I want to try not to get too sidetracked. There's going to be a lot of potential rabbit holes that we can go down from all these conversations. But for the most part, no, it's pretty straightforward. In other words, every Jew keeps Shabbat based on their time zone, sunrise and sunset, based on where they are. And if you're traveling on a boat, and we discussed in earlier lessons that there are allowances of how you're allowed to travel on a boat on Shabbat. You can't be operating the boat, but let's say it's being operated by non-Jews, and you're not doing it for 24 hours, you're not embarking or disembarking, then you'd be fine. In that instance, whenever sunset is in your place, that's when you would begin Shabbat or end Shabbat with nightfall, etc. And actually, there's discussion. Even you may be familiar with the fact that there's 2 sunsets according to Jewish tradition, and that there are some people that keep based on one sunset, some people that keep based on a different sunset, and that there's even a window in between called Bein Hashmashot, which means between the suns. In other words, between the sunsets. And the reason for this is because of exactly what you're mentioning, which is there is the sunset, the precise sunset based on exactly where you are at this moment. So to just make your question even more extreme, Tova Jane, what if I start Shabbat in my house, but then over Shabbat I take a Shabbos stroll to your house? In theory, there's a fraction of a second that Shabbat would be different, right? So, according to some opinions, it doesn't really go based on the actual sunset. It goes based on what's called Shkia Hanirit, which would be significantly later. In other words, the visible sunset. Anyways, that's a whole different conversation. The reason I wanted to bring this up, and I guess the rabbit hole that I wanted to avoid going down, but I just want to mention, is the international dateline with regards to things like Shabbat, or with regards to things like davening, right? So when you fly to Australia, I can't remember which one is which, but one of the ways to Australia, you end up davening Shacharit twice on your plane ride, and you have very short days. And the other way, you actually end up davening Shacharit only once. And till today, there's discussion about whether you even need to daven Shacharit twice that second time, because could be that you already, do you have to daven Shacharit for Monday twice? Because you're going to experience Monday on Australian time and then come here and then experience it on US time. And where this gets even more complicated is with regards to counting the Omer. Because for the most part, with regards to Shabbat, everybody agrees. If you take a flight from one country to another country, whatever, from one side of the date line to another side of the date line, it really doesn't make a difference where you're flying from or to, and then you jump a day or you fall back a day, you still keep Shabbat based on the current location. You might have lost Tuesday and not experienced that Tuesday, which is fine. In other words, there might not be a full 6 days between Shabbat to Shabbat for you, but it's not supposed to be a relative mitzvah. It's supposed to be an objective mitzvah, right? So therefore, it's fine because you do it based on the area that you're in. When it comes to the counting of the Omer, however, that becomes very, very iffy because when it comes to counting the Omer, there are many opinions that the counting of the Omer is supposed to be subjective. And that may result in you arriving, let's say, in the US from Australia, continuing to count the Omer on your own schedule and then keeping Shavuot on a different day than everybody else is keeping it. Which is pretty wild, if you ask me. Which is why the Rebbe used to advise all Chabadniks who asked him this question. They're about a very deep approach to this and a very sophisticated approach to this. But for the most part, the Rebbe's advice always was avoid flying across the international date line during Sefirat HaOmer. So, like, for example, I went to Korea, South Korea, that is, I should clarify, right? To run a Passover Seder. The way there, we flew from Detroit. We took like a 17-hour flight, direct flight, from Detroit directly to, well, it wasn't direct, I was in New York. I took a short flight to New York, to Detroit, and then from Detroit to Korea, a 17-hour flight direct. And then the way back, I took like a 27-hour, not flight, but 27-hour journey, where I stopped in Bangkok on the way, and then I stopped again in India on the way, in order to go around the world and not cross the international date line. So I kind of went the slow way, the other way, for precisely that reason. I did the same thing when I traveled to Australia a couple of years later, also during the Yom. Anyways, and then of course that leads to the other question, which is that you travel one way and then you travel back the other way, right? If you're going to go back and forth, can you just be on your own Omer counting and then realign back with your locale when you get back? Anyways, these are all rabbit holes that I did not want to go down. I just want to bring them up to kind of tickle your imagination of that. Basically, Judaism is a very calendar-oriented religion. We have lots of mitzvot that depend on the calendar, so that those would be some of the issues of space. Now, more recently, there's been lots of talk about colonization of Mars, yes, which leads to text 2. Which is a rabbi writing in a journal. So, by the way, what we're quoting now these days, like in this lesson, most of what we're going to be quoting is not going to be poskim. We're not, well, they will be poskim, but it will not necessarily be. These questions don't tend to come to an international rabbi first. They'll come first, being brought up by people that are working in that field and are from that are religious, and they're keeping it, and they want to be able to they want to bring this to the attention of the public, so they'll write articles on the essays on the subject, etc. So let's take a look at text 2, which talks about keeping Judaism on Mars. Steve Shmuel Yitzchak, if I can ask you to read for us, please, on page 235, mitzvot on Mars.
Okay. In this article, I will focus on the halachic challenges of mitzvah observance. I'm tripping.
I'm sorry.
I got caught underdressed in the cold weather last night.
Okay.
You
weren't in New York.
No,
okay.
In Reno. Same day, very warm and very cold.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, never mind.
Wish you a refuah shalema.
Mitzvah observance as they arise on the planet Mars, since Mars presents a particularly unusual and exceptional case. Mars is the 4th planet in our solar system. Its diameter is about half of that of Earth. Gravitational pull is approximately 40% of Earth's gravity. A full day on Mars lasts 24 hours and 37 minutes. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, if we define the halachic day based on the Martian day and night, the cumulative difference of the extra 37 minutes per day would eventually lead to a situation where Shabbat on Mars would fall when it's Tuesday or Wednesday on Earth. On the other hand, if we ignore the Martian day and define the halachic day strictly according to Earth's 24-hour cycle, people will end up praying Shacharis in the middle of the Martian night.
And that's, I don't think that's only an issue with Shacharis, I think it's also an issue with the start of Shabbat. In other words, I guess the question would be what you would decide about Shacharit. But if you're going based on sunrise and sunset of the Martian sunrise and sunset, so slowly you're drifting into the midweek, right? All of a sudden your Shabbat is not, you'd be very, people would start accusing you of being Christian first because they would move to Sunday, right? And they would accuse you of being your own new religion, where Shabbat is on Monday, and on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, and so it would kind of drift its way through the calendar. And obviously that's not in the Torah, that doesn't. Now, but if you follow the 24-hour period, right? So also something will drift, but it won't be Shabbat moving throughout the week. What will happen is all of a sudden your Shabbat will be starting no longer at sunrise or sunset. If you decide, okay, I'm going to go based on the 24-hour period, it's only 37 minutes off, we'll be fine. The first Shabbat, you'd be okay. You'd be starting pretty close to sunset, ending pretty close to nightfall, you'll be okay. The next week, all of a sudden, you're starting Shabbat 2-3 hours after, or whatever, a couple weeks later, you're starting Shabbat a few hours after sunset. In fact, you may even be starting Shabbat in the morning, and then ending, the next morning. You see the issue at play. So I guess we could ask the same question. We would say, when would Shabbat be on Mars? And again, we would have lots of options. Maybe never. Maybe because you're not on Earth, therefore you don't keep Shabbat. Maybe it should be the 7th 24-hour cycle after the first Jew arrives, based on what we were saying about keeping Shabbat in space. Maybe it should be the 7th Martian day after the first Jew arrives, as we discussed. Maybe it should be matching one's place of origin on Earth, wherever you came from. Now you have a whole community of people on Mars, right? Fast forward enough into the future. You have a whole community of people on Mars, and each one of them is keeping Shabbat a different day because they're all based on their place of origin on Earth. Or matching Israel. That would align everybody together, right? But it would still be a 24-hour period. It wouldn't be a 24-hour and 37-minute period. You see the issues that can come up. Okay. The next question I'd like to talk about is
Can I say something? I had an idea that was similar to the way we deal with leap year.
Okay.
Maybe every 14 days have a leap day.
Have a leap day. Stick in an extra day. Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
That might also be an option, yes. And by the way, that might not even come from Jews. Maybe non-Jews that are arriving on, like regular people that are arriving on Mars, they would be the first people to have to deal with like aligning Earth and Mars, just for communication purposes and stuff like that. And then maybe they would do something like that, and we would then tag along to that 100%. I don't know. That's a fascinating insight. That's not one of the options we brought up here. Okay. The reason it's not brought up, Steve, is because you're making a mistake that I wouldn't have expected you to make based on having been in this class for the past five weeks. Meaning, you came up with a good idea. It's a fascinating idea, and I think that's why I jumped right away to the non-Jews. You came up with a fascinating idea, but what you didn't do is base it on any Talmudic practice. Oh, this is where I'm getting it from, and I'm applying this idea from here to here, which is really the way you're supposed to answer a question like this. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but he did have it. We do have a leap year. We have done that.
Yes. So now,
I
but
think
you
that
need to
is a
go and look.
I'm standing up for Steve.
You're standing up for Steve. He has precedent. The answer that I would say is, but leap year is not just precedent. Leap year has a whole. You have to go look at leap year and see whether you feel it applies or not. I have a feeling if Steve did a deep dive into, and maybe that's why I'm pushing back, because I have done this deep dive. If you go look into the origins of a leap year, the origins of a leap year are actually from the Torah itself. The Torah itself tells us, Shamor et Chodesh HaAviv, keep Passover in the spring. That's a command. That's a mitzvah to actually make a leap year. We don't have a mitzvah to keep Shabbat on a particular seventh day in alignment with Earth. You know what I mean? We just have a mitzvah to keep it every 7 days.
Yeah, let the Goyim worry about their calendar.
You say, we do our thing, and then they'll have to catch up to us. Anyways, you can see how these questions are being discussed and why there are rabbis bringing up different opinions. And all of them, like I mentioned with the desert case, traveling the desert case, what they're trying to do is they're trying to apply cases from the Talmud to the current case. All right, let's have some more fun. Let's keep going. Yes? Let's talk a little bit about surrogacy and how it applies to gene editing, believe it or not. So in recent decades, one of the big halachic questions. This is a question I've even had to deal with like children in our Hebrew school, etc., surrounding reproductive technologies, IVF, etc. And in most instances, the question is with regards to the identity of the child, whether the child is Jewish or not. So when a woman carries a child that was conceived with another woman's egg, which is what we call a surrogate, right? Or I think the medical term I think is the gene host, right? Am I right about that? Anybody know? I think so. I think it's called the gene host. Anyways, when a woman carries a child that's conceived with another woman's egg, the question becomes, who is the mother, right? Is the halachic mother the one who provided the egg? Because that's the genetic mother. That's what we're going to call the genetic mother, right? Or is it the woman who carried the child? Again, this is assuming that the egg and the sperm came from two other people. The embryo was begun in a petri dish, and then it was put into this surrogate to carry for 9 months for the gestational period. So we're going to call that woman the gestational mother, right? And the question becomes, who is the mother? And this is a very, very big deal as a Jew, because you have to know who to write a card to on Mother's Day, right? This is not a small matter, right? I'm joking, of course. There are some real issues that can come up from this, and I'll give an example of it in a moment. Now, halachic authorities are divided. Some say you have to go based on the genetic mother, the one who provides the egg, and some say you should go based on the gestational mother, the one that carries and births the child. And you could see each one of them bringing their Talmudic references, etc. And it's way beyond the scope of today's lesson, because I want to save time at the end to do that with the AI. But I want to at least give some pushback to each position, if you will, just to show you how not simple this is. It might seem simple when you just have a surrogate mother. Okay, you see each side, you choose your side, you're like, yeah, makes sense, it's a gestational mother. After all, she's the one who gave birth to the child. All right, let's see. But as you'll soon see, there are questions that arise, and there's pressure that's going to be put on each side that it's not really going to fully make sense. And the first pressure that I'd like to put, if you will, is on those that say that the genetic mother is the halachic mother. In other words, the woman who provided the egg. What would be the issue with that? So the issue with that would be something called mitochondrial cell transfer. And you don't trust me. You don't want me to explain to you what mitochondrial cells and the transfer of them is. So we have a video for you, and then afterwards we'll discuss what the halachic implications of this would be. Please turn your attention to the video screen.
Mitochondrial diseases cover a wide range of conditions caused by genetic mutations. In the UK alone, they affect thousands. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. They use a process called oxidative phosphorylation to generate energy. But a mitochondrion is a complex piece of machinery, and a lot can go wrong. It takes around 1,500 proteins for mitochondria to function, and problems with many of these can lead to disease. The cell's nuclear DNA creates all but 13 of these proteins. The rest are coded for by the DNA in the mitochondria themselves, and mutations in either can cause problems. A cell has just one nucleus and many mitochondria. All a cell's mitochondria contain their own DNA. If a mutation affects mitochondrial DNA, some might be healthy, others defective. And different cells can have different numbers of defective mitochondria inside them. That means that some cells may be less affected than others. The diseases caused by damaged mitochondria can also be varied. They can affect any organ or tissue, and they can appear at different times throughout life. For example, Leigh syndrome is the most common type to develop in childhood. It can affect patients in a number of ways, including loss of skills, epilepsy, and problems with muscle function. Mutations in over 75 genes in both nuclear and mitochondrial DNA can lead to this syndrome. So what can be done to tackle mitochondrial diseases, like Leigh syndrome? Treating patients is difficult, but in some cases the disease can be stopped before it's passed on. Mitochondria are inherited from the mother. If the mutation is in the mitochondrial DNA, this inheritance can be blocked. One approach is to combine the nuclear DNA from an affected egg cell with healthy mitochondria from another woman. The embryo would then have nuclear DNA from the original mother and father, and mitochondrial DNA from the egg cell donor. This has led some to call such potential infants three-parent babies. This technique is still very new, but it has recently been approved in the UK. It may be a controversial approach, but techniques like these could finally help combat these devastating diseases.
And this, of course, raises so many halachic questions. Some of the questions, for example, are even whether you're allowed to do them. In the US, for example, mitochondrial, even clinical research using mitochondrial transfer in human beings is actually illegal. But in the UK and Australia, they've actually changed their policies. Why? Because they feel that mitochondrial transfer would prevent diseases. Why in the US is it illegal? Because as you can imagine, telling a random person that they can just change the gene line, it's not just affecting them, it's affecting later generations and the genetics of later generations. You can't just do that without asking them, etc., right? Having said all this, that's only one question you would have to ask halachically, whether halacha would allow us to do such a thing or not, right? Let's assume halacha says you can't do it for whatever reason, right? Because of some of the follow-up questions that we're going to ask now. But even then, the question would be, if somebody does do it against halacha, what is their status now? Do they have two mothers, right? Ron, can you read for us, please? Page 237. This is from Rabbi Dr. J. David Belaich. Mitochondrial transfer. Text 3.
In technology, whatever can be done will be done, regardless of moral reservations on the part of some. A fiat accompli, even if immoral inception, poses halakhic questions that even if unwelcome must be answered. In instances of mitochondrial DNA replacement, who is the mother? Is the mother the woman who produced the ovum from which the nucleus was taken, or the donor of the mitochondrial DNA? If only some defective mitochondrial genes are replaced, who is the mother? In as yet unanticipated situations in which replacement genes are donated by multiple women, who is the mother? Is it possible that the infant may have multiple mothers, since each donor of a genetic material is to be considered to be one of the neonate?
Neonate. It just means a newborn child. Yep.
Neonate's mother.
So as you can see, we've brought up a few halachic questions, but all of these halachic questions only apply to someone who is treating the genetic mother as the mother. If to you, as we mentioned, there were two halachic opinions, right? If to you, you take the position of that the gestational mother is the actual halachic mother of this newborn, so then you don't have to worry about all these genes. But if you do say that the genetic mother, right, you get no questions. But if you say the genetic mother is the halachic mother, so then you end up with all sorts of questions. The most obvious, obviously, is, are they Jewish? If one of those mothers is Jewish and one of them is not, then you can ask the question both ways, right? The nuclear, what's the word? The nuclear cells, I think they were called, and the mitochondrial cells, right? So if one of them is from one woman, one of them is from another woman, and one of them is Jewish, and one of them is not, which one does it become? And some people might say, oh yeah, it always goes based on the nuclear cell. People like to say that, like to shoot from the hip. It's not so simple. Even if you try to apply halachic concepts, like for example, there's a halachic concept of rov, which means that sometimes you go based on the majority. In this instance, I don't know that you can go based on the majority. There's always, majority doesn't mean that the minority doesn't exist. Majority just means that we are treating the minority as if it doesn't exist because we don't need it to exist. It's such a small minority, whatever it is. In this case, you actually introduced the minority. Right? You introduce these mitochondrial cells in order to, because there's some benefit you want from it, most likely preventing disease. But that doesn't change the fact that you would that would fly in the face of using the halachic concept of rov, for example. You wouldn't be able to just say, oh, the majority and the minority. So the obvious question would be, which one is the mother? And based on which one is the mother, the question would become, is this child Jewish? And if the child is Jewish or not Jewish, that changes, that changes like life or death situations from a Jewish perspective. Right? What about a Kohen? Right? Kohen, even though Kohen goes based on the father, but there are elements of the mother being a Bas Kohen which influence this, which influence the child. Why? Because there's a mitzvah of Pidyon Aben, for example, firstborn redemption, which is only for a child that's born to an Israelite woman and an Israelite man. And in this case, an Israelite woman is someone who was not born to a Kohen or a Levi. So that could also become a question if one of them is and one of them isn't. I know I made a joke before, tongue in cheek, about the Hallmark cards, the Mother's Day cards, right? And most likely the answer, of course, according to Hallmark, is both. You have to send one to each of your mothers, right? But what about the mitzvah of Kabed et Avicha v'et Imecha? Again, some doesn't come down to like life or death situations, and you need to. But I could think of a situation where like both mothers are in danger, and he has to choose which one he's going to save, which one is his halachic mother, and which one not. So this was some pushback to those that say that the genetic mother is the mother. It's not so simple. But as we're going to see, okay, you think this, okay, let's just go with the gestational mother then, right? As we're going to see, not so simple either. There is research that is being done, and it seems to be very promising, although it has never been done successfully yet, for something which is called ectogenesis. Has anybody ever heard of this before? Ectogenesis is exactly what it sounds like. Genesis, birth, that happens outside of a womb. In other words, it wouldn't be outside of a womb, outside of a woman's body. It would happen in a lab, obviously starting in a petri dish, and eventually in an artificial womb, and then the child would be born. And it seems to be more and more likely that something like this will be available in the future, that for whatever the reasons may be, whether people are struggling with infertility, etc. So again, one of the questions would be whether a Jew is allowed to engage in this, etc. Just like halacha had to deal with whether a Jew is allowed to engage in vitro fertilization, etc., or not. But once somebody does something, there's all sorts of questions, right? Does this child have no halachic mother? Let's take a look at text 4, which is from Rabbi Ralbag from 2003. Where are we holding here? Shmuel Yitzchak, if you can read for us, please. Text 4, page 238.
Oh, I got it. Okay. There's a theory in medical science that it will be possible to have a fetus develop from a fertilized egg without implanting the egg in the woman's body. Instead, it will develop inside an incubator that will replicate the conditions of a woman's womb. In this incubator, the embryo will grow from the initial stage of a fertilized egg into a final stage of gestation, when a fully developed fetus will emerge into the world. In such a case, who is the child's mother?
And just to clarify, this is not a technical question like, oh, who does he have to send the Mother's Day card to? There's all sorts of real ramifications to this. For example, are we going to say that he has no halachic mother? So then can he marry his sibling who is not his halachic sibling? Can a brother and sister get married? These are crazy questions that I don't advise getting involved in, but that may really be a reality, and there's going to be all sorts of halachot that are going to need to apply to them. Okay, I'm going to leave this conversation here, even though really we could take it much deeper. It's not really just a question about whether he has no halachic mother. You could even really ask the question whether he's a halachic human being. In other words, because the Torah, according to some commentary, part of the definition of a human being, according to the Torah, would be someone that's born from a mother. Like if you open up any time the angels are talking with Moses in Tractate Shabbat, there's a whole bunch of midrashic excerpts, and one of the lines that they always throw in is they said Mali alud isha beinenu. They call them, anytime angels want to refer to human beings, they want to put them down. They call them like the son of a mother. So they call him like this human being who was born from a mother, as if that's the biggest insult, right? But obviously we don't view it as an insult. We view it as what makes us human beings, for better or for worse, by the way. And if that's what it means if that's a big part of what it means to be human, then all sorts of other questions apply. Is murdering a person like that considered murder from a Torah perspective? I know all of us are beyond horrified by that notion, right? But hello, what does it mean to be? We're going to have to ask these questions.
You have to worry about whether that person has a soul.
Yes, it would be connected to whether that person has an neshama or not. Exactly, all these things. I know, but that seems to me to be more of a philosophical question. I'm trying to give you very practical questions, which are probably tied to that philosophical question. But I'm trying to give very practical day-to-day things that are going to need to be dealt with as this becomes more and more of a reality. Now would be a great time to remind you that when we talk about siyata deshmaya, the heavenly help, we spoke about, I think, in lesson 2. I introduced the fact, I think I told that story of the Noda B'Yehuda, where basically siyata deshmaya, the heavenly help that we say that God gives a rabbi in order to be able to deal with questions properly and to get them right, so to speak, only applies in real practical questions that are asked that are really happening. So as much as these questions we see them coming up on the horizon, the real test is going to be when somebody comes to a rabbi and says, listen, I have the opportunity right now to do this, or this is the only way I can have children. What will the halachic status be? Or I already did this. Somebody comes to a rabbi and says, what is the status of this child? And then the rabbi will need to answer, and that will be quite a journey as when that time comes. Okay. The next topic of conversation, we have another video, is lab-grown meat. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
There has been a lot of hype around cell-cultivated food, but how viable is the industry? What does it entail? And more importantly, will consumers bite?
Can you do the honours and lift the lid on your creation?
Over a decade ago on The Edge, we reported on the world's first ever cultured beef burger. Unveiled by Professor Mark Post from Maastricht University, it cost around €250,000 to produce. He went on to set up Mosa Meat, a company which aims to bring the burger to the masses, and he's not alone. There are now hundreds of startups developing their own lab-grown products, but just how do they do it? It's a relatively simple procedure and similar for both meat and plant-based production. For meat, simply take stem cells from animals' tissue, add a nutrient-rich solution and watch the cells multiply into the three main components of meat: muscle, fat and connective tissue. Then put the cells into bioreactors, or as they're more commonly known, cultivators. These cells are then separated and rearranged to build a final edible product. This part of the process is called scaffolding and can be very complicated. A steak, for instance, needs a lot more scaffolding than ground meat in a burger. The entire process takes between 2 and 8 weeks, but the payoff can be huge. It's estimated that just 1,000th of a pound of cow cells can create up to 4.4 billion pounds of beef.
That sounds like an impressive return. So what's the holdup?
Well, cost is a big issue. Currently, lab-grown meat is around 40% more expensive than animal meat. And then there's health and safety concerns. All production must happen in a completely sterile environment because the cells have no natural immunity from diseases. And while traditional meat is nutritionally dense, most of its proteins, vitamins and minerals are introduced via animal feed. You have to add these nutrients into cultured meat, and it's still unclear whether today's additives provide equal nutritional value in the long term. As a result, regulators can't seem to align on the technology. Singapore became the first country in the world to approve cultured meat for human consumption in 2020. The US followed suit 3 years later, and the UK's Food Standards Agency approved use for pet food in early 2024. Italy, meanwhile, has banned the production, sale and import of lab-grown meat entirely, with the government citing its potential negative impact on the country's farming industry. France and Romania might do the same. The EU so far has not offered any guidance, but if it does greenlight use, it could put Brussels on a collision course with angry farmers.
Some critics are calling for more research into the environmental impacts of cultured food, especially if production is ramped up significantly. After all, the manufacturing process still requires an energy source, but those championing the industry believe the benefits outweigh the negatives.
They say cultured food has the potential to dramatically reduce food waste, tantalize our taste buds with things we've never traditionally eaten, and could provide health benefits by tailoring food to nutritional needs, such as removing gluten or saturated fats without compromising on the taste. According to consulting firm McKinsey, cultivated meat could make up as much as 0.5% of the world's meat supply by 2030, making it a $25 billion global industry.
So what are the halachic questions that can come up with lab-grown meat? Obviously, we are now veering into the field of kashrut, right? The field of kosher. And the question is going to be, for starters, if you take, let's assume it's a cell from a cow, right? So it's a kosher animal. And now is that kosher? Is it considered a kosher animal or not? Right? Okay, let's assume, maybe it doesn't even need to be an animal, etc. Maybe it's just considered, is it Eiver min achai? That's the next question. Eiver min achai means flesh of a living animal, which actually even Noahites are prohibited from, according to Jewish law. And other questions would become, is this considered meat? Is it meat or is it dairy? Right? So let's take a look at text 5. Also, as you can see, some of this stuff is like literally from 2022. This is really emerging stuff. Tova Jane, if you can read for us, please, page 240, text 5, lab-grown meat.
In recent years, the question of whether lab-grown meat is kosher has shifted from a theoretical discussion to a practical halakhic issue. Since discussion began in 2013, following the unveiling of the first stem cell-based hamburger by Mark Post, the field has seen several breakthroughs. Today, the cost of producing cultured meat is much closer to that of conventional meat, and the product resembles regular meat in appearance, texture, and taste, with the aim of reaching complex similarity. I guess that's right. Complete similarity.
Complete
okay,
similarity.
I got it. I couldn't see. Okay.
That's okay.
As a result, halakhic questions surrounding the lab-grown meat are no longer matters of science fiction. These include: is this product kosher only if it's derived from a kosher animal? Perhaps even only from a kosher animal that has been properly slaughtered? and should it be classified as fleischig or parva?
Right. So that the second question there, which says perhaps even only from a kosher animal that was properly slaughtered, brings up a simple question like, are you allowed to eat a piece of meat from an animal that wasn't slaughtered? Forget the fact that it's alive, right? Okay, so alive, you would have an issue of Ever Ben Achayev, taking flesh from a living animal. Nevela, if the animal is dead, you would have the issue of nevela, which is you're not allowed to eat food from an animal that died naturally. It has to be shechted. But shechita provides its own issues. Once you shecht the animal, if at all, we'd have to have a biological scientist here, but if at all possible, the cells would have to be taken almost immediately. The practicality of that is very, very low. So as a result, on page 241, we have this whole exercise where for each case you need to decide, first of all, is this meat kosher or not kosher? And if it's kosher, is it kosher parav or is it kosher meat, right? If it's grown from a cell taken from a properly slaughtered kosher animal, if it's grown from a cell taken from a kosher animal that died naturally, if it's grown from a cell that was from a living kosher animal, grown from a cell taken from a lab-grown embryo of a kosher animal, right? It's a whole new stage. Grown from a cell taken from a lab-grown embryo of a non-kosher animal, and grown from a cell taken from the hair of a non-kosher animal. In each of these instances, there are different elements that would play a factor. Today, as of 2023, the OU certified a lab meat company in Israel called Supermeat, and the OU maintains that a cell from a non-kosher animal results in non-kosher product. So they make them have, in other words, the meat that has the certification on it is meat that was derived from the cell of a kosher animal, and the same is true for a cell taken from a kosher animal that was alive or that died naturally. In other words, those would also not be kosher. So it has to be taken from a kosher animal that was slaughtered properly. That's the only way that they would let it. Supermeat grows its meat from cells extracted from a kosher lab-grown animal embryo. That's where they take it from. And the OU and the OK define it as fleischig. So they market it, and they market it as fleischig. This is just fascinating stuff that I think we're all going to watch unfold over the next short while. Okay.
What do they say about the part of the animal it's taken from? Because you can't, we can't.
I think that falls into the same category. In other words, they're saying you
in
have
terms of kosher, but they also say you can't take it from the part
gidanasha or from the chaylev, or all the different parts of the animal that we're not allowed to eat. Correct? Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. If you'd like, I can post a link. There's a rabbi here in Los Angeles. His name is Rabbi Shalom Kesselman, who's very involved in the kosher industry. I remember he wrote an article on this subject. I can post a link to that article in the follow-up email. I'll post a link if you'd like to explore this a little more. Now, I've never bought this in the store, and I've never seen it sold in the store, but apparently it's already a product that's available to purchase in stores, so that's why I think this is a very relevant topic. Okay. In the remainder of today's class, I'd like to use this time to tackle the final question. And this one, we are going to answer it. We're not just going to pose it as a question and see what the halachic implications would be. We're going to actually take this all the way to the end. And more importantly, we're going to do so based on all the tools that we picked up over these past 5 lessons specifically. Right? So, first of all, let's put the question on the table. I think raise your hand if you've experimented with AI to one degree or another. You've typed some questions at the ChatGPT, or you've used Gemini, or you've seen summaries, or you've seen questions or videos that have been produced by AI. I think that's almost all of us. So, can AI be used to answer halachic questions? Can you turn to an AI, an artificial intelligence agent, program, or whatever, bot, or whatever you want to call them, and are we perhaps living in the final era of Responsa? In other words, maybe AI will soon, or already, take over the job of a rabbi answering rabbinic responsa, which we've learned so much about, and perhaps they can ace all of the five lessons that we've spoken about, the process of how a rabbi goes about answering that, and maybe they can even do a better job than rabbis, and soon that will be the future of asking halachic questions. I think Judaism has to be open to that question. So let's start with lesson 1. All right. In lesson 1 of this course, we discussed what a question says about a society that's asking that question, about the people that are asking that question. And I think that this to me, one of the most amazing things about AI, regardless of whether we'll be able to answer a lot of questions or not, which we'll talk about soon, it speaks to the fact, one of the big prophecies, probably the most important prophecy, and probably also the least believable prophecy, that we have in all of our literature about Mashiach, about the times of Mashiach, the end of days, is that the knowledge will become widespread. In other words, first of all, there will be a democracy of knowledge. Everybody will have access to the same knowledge. And more specifically, this will be a preparation for the fact that the knowledge of God will cover the earth as water covers the sea. The reason I say this is because I remember when Google came out, and when Google came out, this was already a big topic of discussion. The fact that, I don't think, if you would have asked your ancestors 300 years ago, they would have felt like that's the biggest miracle that ever could be with the coming of Mashiach, possibly even a bigger miracle than the reviving of the dead. The reviving of the dead, they can envision it happening. But how can you imagine the entire body of knowledge of the world all of a sudden being accessible to everybody? Doesn't everybody need to think with their own brains? And Google took that one step further, like the internet and all information going to the internet, etc. And I think artificial intelligence is really saying something at the time that we live in. We live in a time of Mashiach. We live in a time where the reality of godliness, of godly knowledge being accessible to everyone and at every level is no longer a miraculous concept, right? If Mashiach came and one of his massive miracles was that he had the ultimate AI bot that could answer any question that you have about Judaism, and it would be 100% reliable, I think that would be completely believable. It wouldn't be very miraculous to people. They'd be like, yeah, he just has a little bit more advanced technology than us. Why am I starting off with this? Because first of all, I think this says a lot about the question that we're asking. The question that we're asking is, are we in the times of Mashiach? I think that's a very important way of framing that question. Because when we ask, can AI be used to answer halachic questions, we are essentially asking, is the Torah, are we in this era now where toil of Torah is no longer an issue? And as we're going to see, as we unpack this question, we start to go through all 5 lessons, we're going to see how relevant this question is and why the answer is going to have to be no. To one degree or another. It's going to be yes and no. But to at least to some degree, the answer is going to have to be no, because making the answer yes will only be available when Mashiach comes, if that makes any sense. Okay. But for now, let's try to actually answer the question. Now that we've just spoken a little bit about what this question says about us meaning the people of this generation that are asking this question, let's talk about lesson 2. So lesson 2, if you remember, we discussed, that was the lesson where we discussed hydrologists and the Nile rising, etc., right? In lesson 2, we discussed that every rabbi needs to be able to, first thing a rabbi needs to do is to gather the facts, to understand what this, in this case, what AI is and what AI isn't, and what it's capable of and what it's not capable of. And that's a question that's consistently evolving. So you would have to have your finger on the pulse. That's number 1. But having said that, I think most of us have spent some time tinkering around with AI. And as a result, we can immediately come up with certain issues that there might be, which I want to get out of the way fairly quickly. The reason I want to get this out of the way fairly quickly is because these are going to be very, very today issues. But that maybe with time, AI will get better and that those issues will not be issues. So right off the bat, just from tinkering around with AI, the first thing I can think of is AI hallucinations. Has anybody ever heard of this before? So AI is well documented. Toba Jane, I would have thought you would have heard about it, because I actually think that one of the biggest news stories in this regard, I'll try to link it in the after lesson email, was of a lawyer who came before, who presented his arguments before the justice. I don't think it was the Supreme Court. I think it was just a regular court. And he had used AI in its early infant days to find precedent cases that he can bring to support his case. And the AI literally hallucinated the cases that he needs. So one of the big issues with AI is that for whatever reason, whether it's programmed this way and by human beings or whether it just picked this up on its own, that's the way it should be, I don't know. But AI is constantly trying to make you right. In other words, it's for lack of a better word, it's kissing up to humans. It's constantly kissing up to humans. Like if AI says something and then you say, no, I saw something else, it will always tell you, oh yeah, let me tell you why and what that is. Like, anyways, so why do I say this? Because when you ask a question to which the answer should be to assume that your question is wrong, AI will often not do that to you. It won't tell you that you're wrong. Now it's constantly learning in this regard, but one of the examples that was done in this regard was the authors of this course, when they were putting together the course, they asked AI, I think it was ChatGPT, I don't remember exactly which one it was, but they asked them a question. They said, who was the first rabbi to suggest that there are spiritual benefits to eating matzah on Rosh Hashanah? Now, obviously, this is quite a ludicrous question, and the AI just came up with an answer. A real rabbi It said it was Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who we've learned about in this lesson, and it gave even whatever the spiritual reason that it felt would be to eat matzah, and it was something that sounded very good. It was just completely factually inaccurate, right? Just like this lawyer who brought these precedent cases before the judge, and they were completely fabricated. And there's instances of this in every single field, right? And I think every field will have to struggle with this. In other words, these AI hallucinations. Now, the reason I bring this up as an issue, but really, I just want to get it out of the way, because it's not really the real issue at hand, is because that's something I can see with time AI getting better at. So there might be a time when AI will not be hallucinating anymore. Which brings me to the second point, which is really in the same category. The other limit of AI is that when you ask ChatGPT a question today, you have no idea whether that information is coming based off millions of pieces of data, millions, gazillions, I don't know, an unlimited amount of pieces of data that there are out there in the universe, on the internet, I guess specifically, and some of those are Christian. Some of those are maybe even intentionally being put there in order to get AI bots to say the wrong thing, right? There are all sorts of nefarious places on the internet. So, and I think this is one that's already being dealt with. I think there's a tool called AI Torah, which again I can link in the after lesson email, which is kind of dealing with this to one degree or another. And what their solution has been is give the AI, you can train certain AIs to only use certain sources and not use anything else, okay? Which seems to do away with this issue of foreign influence, material that isn't based on the Torah that's being factored into the AI's reasoning. However, I will caution you that even with this AI Torah tool and others like it, we're not there yet. And maybe we will be there, but right now we're not there yet. Even if it's told only to use certain things as a source, you have to think about, this is difficult for me it's hard to put my finger on this, but you have to think about the way that AI processes information, which also is based on data which may have foreign influence. So I'll give you an example. There is an AI tool out there, which somebody created, in which basically they fed into it all of the Torah of the Rebbe. So the entire Torah Menachem, the Kotei Sichos, Igros Kodesh, all of the material that has been published of the Rebbe's Torah, and you can ask it any question you want. So I had some fun with it. Like all of us, we right away like to push the edges and see what it's going to do in certain situations. So I asked it a question. I said, what was the Rebbe's reaction to 9/11? Right? Now, fascinatingly, its answer was, the Rebbe passed away on the 3rd of Tammuz, 1994, June 12th, I think it was, 1994. And therefore, the Rebbe was not alive when the Twin Towers, when 9/11 occurred, and therefore he didn't really have an official approach, but we can assume based on this and that, and then it gives you a whole bunch of things. Now, there's a whole bunch of information here which was used to formulate that response. That is, I promise you won't find in any of the books of the Rebbe's Torah. So I don't know how it's only using the Rebbe's Torah. What do I mean by that? Who told it what happened in 9/11? Obviously, it's getting that information from somewhere. And there may be more factually accurate and more factually inaccurate websites, and that means that maybe it's getting better at it, maybe it'll be more accurate, but that is an information that it had in its thinking process, or that it is using, which is from foreign sources. Who told it, for example, that the Rebbe passed away on the 3rd of Tammuz, 1994? I promise you that's not found anywhere in the Rebbe's Torah, obviously, right? So what's the take here? Where did they get that information from? So even the way that the AI thinks can be a foreign influence that also we need to factor in. Does that make sense? Again, I don't know how to say that any better, other than the way that AI thinks. It's factoring in information, even it's English. Who told it what words mean in English? There's all sorts of things that would have to be factored in. But again, let's assume that can get better. Now, which leads me basically to the real issue that I want to talk. Well, not the real issue, but let's continue this conversation. I can see a day where AI is getting things. In other words, if you ask AI today if it can answer a halachic question, it will tell you no. I can give you whatever information I have, but you should always double check that in an actual sefer, which is a Jewish book, or with an actual rabbi, etc. Why is it saying that? One of the reasons that it says that, one of the reasons why we're encouraged to do that, is because of the issues that we just discussed and other issues like them that will make that the information that it's giving you is factually inaccurate, right? But I want to point out that should all of those things be fixed, let's assume it'll get to a phase where it'll be 100% accurate, and it'll be tested 1.5 million times, and it'll be 100% accurate all the time. Even then, and I guess this is where we get to our first yes. Okay, so remember I told you to answer this question: can AI answer a halachic question? The answer is going to be yes and no. So let's talk about some of the areas where it's yes. And by way of introduction, let me ask you a simpler question: can I ask AI or Google, for that matter, or none of them? Can I go to a website called ChabadPasadena.com and go scroll to the bottom where it says candle lighting time for this week and see what time candle lighting is this week? I don't know what time candle lighting is, and I go to the website, and the website tells me what time candle lighting is. Presumably, I don't know the answer. I'm asking a halachic question. I'm getting the answer from a website, right? How can I trust it? Let me ask you a simpler question. If I have a particular dish in front of me, and I'm not sure what bracha it is, but I have at home, I have one of these pamphlets, that I got as a kid in school that has all a whole list of things, like a brachos B, they call them in school, right? A whole bunch of items, random, like complicated, sophisticated items. It's the topic of our class that's starting after Pesach on Sunday mornings. We're calling it a taste of thanks. And I look at it, and I see that the answer is that the bracha for this particular thing is that it's considered a fruit halachically, and therefore you make ha'etz on it. And I make a ha'etz. Did I just ask a question of a piece of paper and get an answer from a piece of paper? What happened to the whole, we have to ask a rabbi, and you have to ask a halachic question, and the rabbi has to have his knowledge, etc., etc.? No. The answer is that in both of these instances, there isn't a psak halacha happening. There isn't a ruling happening. So let's define what we mean by a ruling. What we mean by a halachic ruling is all of the process that we described in lessons 2 through 5. Where a rabbi will go collect the facts, look for precedent in the Talmud, and here's a key factor. He's not going to find the answer in the Talmud. If he finds the answer in the Talmud and he's giving you a halachic ruling, he's actually just stroking his own ego for no reason. If a person comes to somebody and asks, can I do X, Y, Z on Shabbat? And that answer is found in Shulchan Aruch. That's not a halachic question with a halachic ruling being answered in response. That's just information being shared. I'll explain what I mean. There is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, law in Shulchan Aruch, and I'll ask somebody to read it. At least looks like she's drinking. So, Ron, if you can read for us, please. I'm not sure if you were last. Anyways, text 6. Quoting, not creating. This is lifted directly out of the Shulchan Aruch, a law of the Shulchan Aruch. What does it say?
Person is never permitted to issue halakhic rulings in the vicinity of his teacher, unless his teacher passes away or grants him explicit permission. Some write that a student may issue rulings that appear in existing codified works, even in his teacher's lifetime, so long as the student doesn't rule using his own reasoning or by comparing one's case to another.
That last line is the most important line I want to talk about. The difference between just lifting something out of a book and giving that information to somebody, and I would argue that 95% of the questions get asked to me, 95% of the questions that get asked to any rabbi, unless you're like one of these specialty rabbis who deals with specialty cases, and that's what he spends his whole day answering. If you have a congregation, 95% of the questions are just going to be, Rabbi, remind me, do we read the Megillah on Purim by night or by day? And then the answer is by both. You have to read it once by night and once by day. Right? Rabbi, Mishloach Manot, how do I give it? Who do I give it to? These are just me sharing with you things that you don't know because you haven't looked it up in the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe because you don't read Hebrew, maybe because you don't have time, maybe because you just don't have as much experience, whatever it is. But you would like somebody to share with you. 95% of questions are not what we would call a ruling, a hora, learning something out of something else. So those questions, in other words, the 95%, which are questions that essentially you just need somebody to point you in the right direction. One day we can see AI being able to answer that. Why? Because you don't need to be a rabbi in order to answer that question. In theory, you can look it up look it up in a book. You can look it up on a website that's reputable. You can look it up, and it doesn't make a difference. What we're really asking is, can AI do this? What we've been discussing in lessons 2 through 4. Can AI be presented a question about pogroms happening across the Holy Roman Empire in Germany and whatever, and apply laws about who pays for the reparations of a water dam, right, for the maintenance of a water dam, and apply that to this case, which is not just lifting a case out of the Talmud, it's actually following a certain process, which is the unique. For example, a regular human being cannot do that. A regular Jew cannot do that. They do have to ask that of a rabbi. Or any of the other instances which we spoke about, the flying tent versus the tent that's blowing in the air versus the harir balloon over a sukkah, or all the different questions that we spoke about. And in this is included lesson 2, which is knowing the facts on the ground. So that presumably AI would be good enough at, or at least one day can be good enough at. But it would also include lesson 3, which is what we're talking about, this applying of precedent. It would also include, remember, lesson 4 and 5. Lesson 4 was when we spoke about counterweights. Can we rely on AI to know when and when not to bring in a halachic counterweight, one of these big issues that we never, right? And when do you bring it in and when don't you bring it in? It's a rabbinic issue, whatever it is. Can we rely on that? And probably most notably, can we rely on AI to have the 5th factor of Shulchan Aruch? Right? What we spoke about this, the human aspect, the sensitivity, and all of that. So I think these are all questions that we would have to answer, and we'll get to them in just a moment. Yes, Steve, you have a question.
All right. So my experience with AI programs is they rarely make that kind of a definite decision. What they do is refer to how the question had been answered in the past, and it gives you like a laundry list. This rabbi said this, that rabbi said that. That's still up to you.
Yes, but the question, so just to make this question very real, okay, let's take, you're correct, but all that is just giving you information. Let's say I asked AI, you're incorrect about AI only doing that kind of stuff. If you asked AI a question, I just give you an example. I asked this other AI engine, what would the Rebbe's approach be to 9/11? After telling me that the Rebbe didn't have an approach, it gave me what they think the Rebbe's approach would be to 9/11. I asked it the same question about the internet, which also came around after the Rebbe passed away physically from this world. Right? So it was giving me intuition based on the Rebbe's wisdom. And similarly, if you were to ask, so therefore, I think in the halachic sense, you would have to ask one of the questions that we discussed in the first half of today's lesson. Let's say you ask AI, when would a Jew keep Shabbos on Mars? I didn't ask this. Maybe we could do it live in today's class. But if you were to ask that question to AI, what would AI say? I'm sure it wouldn't give you a definite answer, but it would say, maybe we can surmise based on X, Y, Z. And the question is it allowed to do that? Are we allowed to trust AI by comparing one case to another case? As we just discussed, it's a very different thing to do. Even halachically, you're not, right, the halacha that we were just discussing that Ron just read for us. You're not allowed to rule a halachic ruling in front of your teacher. That's only a halachic ruling, not giving information. Giving information, which is 95% of the questions, that you're allowed to, and presumably I can see one day AI being able to do that. Today, because of the hallucinations and the foreign influence, etc., perhaps we're not there yet. But I can see that one day being the case. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
But I want to take this one step further, because really we have to get to a much, much deeper issue that's at play here with AI. Let's assume AI can do this. Okay? Suppose we train an AI to do everything that a rabbi can. All the 5 lessons that we discussed till now. And how do we know this? I don't know. Maybe it goes through a shemush of some sort. Remember we spoke about shemush, which is apprenticeship, that a rabbi, how does a rabbi pick up the process of being a rabbi? By answering questions in the presence of another rabbi, and together with another rabbi, etc., right? Suppose we train it for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years, and by the end of it we see that every single question we make it answer in the blind, and we have the rabbi answer it, and it gets them exactly the same as the rabbi for the entire period. I know I'm describing a hypothetical, but let's say we were able to get there. And so they're identical. They're going to do the same thing for you. This happens for years, whatever it is, right? However long we say it, lasts for 10 years without a single mistake. No problem. What's next? And I realize we're very much in the hypothetical here. Because first of all, AI is still hallucinating. So AI cannot even give you informational answers. The type of halachic answers that, it's not even there yet. But assuming it can get there, and assuming that then it can also master, let's say, the human sensitivity element and how to compare cases to each other, etc., assuming it can do all of that, and we would trust it for whatever reason. So it's now identical to a rabbi. This is the real question I think at play. And the answer to that is going to be no. And that's what I want to talk about. In order to explain this, we're going to go to the Talmud in Bava Metzia. Elise, if we can ask you to read for us, please, text 7. This is a very famous passage in the Talmud.
Okay. Which page?
Page 245. The title is Not in Heaven. And it's a very famous story that happened. I just to set it up, there was an argument in the Talmud about what's called a Tanra Shalachnoi. I'm not going to give you the particulars of that. It's really not relevant what the argument was. Suffice to say that there was a machlokas, or a Talmudic argument, Talmudic disagreement between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis about whether something was tamei or tahor, about whether something was pure or impure. It has to do with an oven which can be assembled or disassembled. I'm not getting into these of it. It's really not relevant. What's relevant is this story that unfolds. Go ahead, Elise.
On that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought forward every imaginable argument, but the sages did not accept them. Said Rabbi Eliezer, if my ruling is correct, let the carob tree prove it. Suddenly, the carob tree was uprooted and moved a distance of 100 cubits. Others say 400 cubits. No proof can be brought from a carob tree, the sages retorted. But Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if my ruling is correct, let the stream of water prove it. Immediately, the stream of water began to flow back. No proof can be brought from a stream of water, the sages responded. He continued to urge, if my ruling is correct, let the walls of the academy prove it. The walls are going to fall. Rabbi Yehoshua rebuked the wall, saying, scholars are engaged in halachic dispute. What right have you to interfere?
Keep going.
Oh, the walls did not cave in completely. In deference to Rabbi Yehoshua, nor did they resume their upright position in deference to Rabbi Eliezer. They are still standing, thus inclined. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if my ruling is correct, let heaven prove it. The heavenly face proclaim. Why do you argue with Rabbi Eliezer? His rulings are always correct. Rabbi Yehoshua rose and exclaimed, it is not in heaven. What did he mean? Said Rabbi Yirmiyah, as the day the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, we ignore heavenly voices. For you have already written in the Torah, follow the majority.
Okay, so this Talmud is a very interesting Talmud. Why? Because it's essentially presenting two ways to reach a halachic ruling, which I think is fascinating for us. On the one hand, we're told that there's the regular way of reaching a ruling, right? People argue it out. They come to the Sanhedrin. Everybody takes sides. We follow the majority, as it says in the Torah, that you're supposed to go after the majority. The alternate option is miracles. Start making miracles. Bring it down from heaven. Whatever it is, right? And get heavenly voices to support you. And what is happening? In a very dramatic fashion, the Talmudic passage declares that the first model is the preferred model. To follow this, what seems to be a flawed, necessary only because we're human beings system, following the majority and the right, seems to be the system that's preferred by the Torah, by Hashem, over miracles or somehow God Himself proving what He wants. Now, if miracles and heavenly voices are disqualified, despite their superior credentials, for sure AI is disqualified as well, right? So the big question becomes, why is it that we don't rely on heaven? So let's take a look at the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, Rabbi Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, page 248, text 8. Tova Jane, if you can read for us, please. Learning, not listening. He explains what is preferable about following the regular way of making a halacha versus God Himself proving it, so to speak. And I think we'll be able to apply this to AI.
Okay. Text 8, is that it?
Text 8, yes.
Okay. If prophets were authorized to resolve doubts regarding the mitzvot of the Torah, the sages would grow lax in their study, analysis, and understanding of the Torah. They would no longer toil over it each day, nor would they push themselves to uncover its depths, instead relying on the interpretations and rulings of the prophets. Even the insights they did attain through a careful investigation would remain uncertain in their eyes, as they would hesitate to trust their own conclusions without hearing confirmation from prophets. But since prophets are not entrusted with interpreting the Torah and its commandments, the sages are compelled to apply themselves to study deeply and to trust their conclusions, because they have nothing to rely on other than their competent minds.
Thank you. In other words, what he's explaining is, and he's calling this toil, right? Where were we here? Okay, we got there. Okay. What he's explaining is that there's something valuable about Torah study and the toil that's involved in Torah study, and when you get divine inspiration. In other words, I guess he's asking this question a different way. Why doesn't God always answer our questions? If we believe he's, omnipotent and he can do whatever he wants, so then why doesn't he always answer our questions? Whenever there's a halachic question, we go to a specific spot and God answers whatever system it is that God will decide. A heavenly voice will come down and answer the question. Why is it that to begin with it wasn't set up that way? Forget why the godly voice is wrong in that story. Why is it that it's set up this way? And the answer is because Torah study is not just a means to an end, it is an end in and of itself. For those of you that attended the Tanya class or have studied Tanya at some point in your lives, you're familiar that chapter 5 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe introduces that the whole purpose of creation of this world is for us to connect to Hashem. And the highest fusion, the highest connection we can have with Hashem is by studying Torah, because Torah is God's wisdom. So if we can somehow get AI to do all of that for us, or heavenly voices for that matter, in this regard there's no difference, then we're losing the most important factor, which is not what the right answer is, it's how you got to the right answer. That journey to get there was the destination, right? When you go through a halachic... One second, we'll get to this in a second. When you go through the process by which you arrive at the conclusion, that itself is a destination. It is an end. It's not just a means to an end. It's actually part of that connection that we want to have with Hashem. And if you use AI, that connection is lost. And it undermines the intellectual effort that Hashem actually desires from us. Okay. Now, up until this point, we've basically just been making a very technical point. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, like, if you go to school, you're in 4th grade or 3rd grade or whenever they're learning addition and multiplication, whatever, right? And you're given a test and it's got 10 math problems on it. You have to answer the math problems. And it's the basic type of math problems, addition, subtraction, multiplication, where you're not allowed to use a calculator. Not, when you get more sophisticated and you're allowed to use the calculator, right? And you're using a calculator under your desk. You do all the answers, you do it quickly, you bring it to the teacher and you say, oh, I wrote it to you and I got them all right. The teacher catches you and the teacher says, hey, you were using a calculator, right? You say, yeah, what's the big deal? So the teacher says, well, then I'm going to fail you. You say, hold on a second. How could you fail me? I got 100 on the test. She says, yeah, but you didn't give the answers. The calculator gave the answers. So you look at her and you say, I don't understand. Teach. What do you need from me? You want to know how much 2 + 2 is? It's 4. Here's your answer. You got your answer. Who cares how you got the answer? You're starting to... So the teacher explains to you, no. I don't need to know how much 2 + 2 is. I already know how much 2 + 2 is. What I need is the journey that you're going to take to get to 2 + 2. That is the most important thing for me, right? The most important thing, what I'm trying to do with this test is to gauge how much knowledge you... So if you use a calculator, which means you weren't involved in the journey at all, then you lost the whole thing, right? But so far, what we're saying is it's a very technical thing. AI can perhaps, at some point in history, will reach a stage where it can do the same job as a rabbi. But we don't like it because it's also about the journey, right? What we're about to say now is that actually, even the final point that I want to make is that even AI giving an answer and a rabbi giving an answer, and they give an identical answer, and the journey, let's leave the journey out of this for a second. The journey is going to happen regardless, let's say. Even then, the identical answers, the one given by the rabbi will be correct, and the one given by the AI will be incorrect because it's missing a certain human component. And let me explain. In order to explain this, we need to go to a medrash, and I'm going to ask Ron to read this Shmuel Yitzchak. Shmuel Yitzchak, to read for us, please, text 9. This is a medrash about what was going on while God was teaching Moses the Torah. There's a lot of medrashim about that, and this is one of them, and it's called the plurality in the Torah. Go ahead, Steve.
For each law that God told Moses, he would enumerate 49 arguments that an object was ritually pure and 49 arguments that the object was ritually impure. Moses said before him, Master of the universe, how long will we struggle to arrive at a clear decision? God responded, follow the majority. If the majority rules impure, it's impure. If the majority rules pure, it's pure.
This is a very important point. Very, very important one. I want to explain exactly what's going on over here. We tend to assume that we walk into a study hall and there's 2 rabbis and they're arguing about a particular oven or about a particular thing, pure or impure, right? And we tend to assume That what they're arguing is they simply don't know. The tradition was lost and they don't know. Right? And the fact that they're piling on, let's say, logic to their argument, to what they believe the conclusion should be on each side, is just because they're very masterful arguers. That's it. They're making their argument very powerfully, but only one of them is right. Right? We like to feel that way because we like to believe that truth is a very static thing. And therefore, when we apply that to Torah, we say Torah is true, so there's only one truth to Torah. But what we're learning here is that actually there's 49 truths to Torah. And in other texts it says there's 70 truths to Torah. So what's going on over here? How do we decide which one is the halacha? And by the way, this is going to give you some real insight into a lot of the words that are used with regards to halacha, including the very word. What does the word halacha mean? Halacha means the way that you go. Halacha doesn't mean truth. Halacha doesn't mean this is the truth. It's tameh, it's tahar, it's pure, it's impure. No, halacha means this is the way we follow. But in alternate versions of the universe, in other words, on alternate spiritual realities, they're all true in some way. There's 49 truths, 70 truths, many truths, unlimited truths to Torah. So how do we decide which way to go? Says the Torah, says God to Moses, Harei Rabim Lahatos. You have to go based on the majority. Going based on the majority will tell you what the right way to go is. What is it called when we make a halacha? Anybody? It's called a halacha, right? The way to go. It's also called a psak. Psak literally means to cut. It's as if you're surgically removing one answer from all the other ones. You're saying this is the one we go with. You're carving out the right answer. You're not revealing the right answer that was always true that nobody knew, and now you're revealing it. No. You're actually you're carving it. You're contracting it from everything else. In other words, what we're trying to say is like this. When a person makes a halachic ruling, they are not revealing a ruling that existed within God and that a heavenly voice can reveal. Hashem has given us the power to actually create the halachic conclusion. And this happened through a process, through a very specific process, through the Sanhedrin. And today that happens through rabbis who have, as we call it, siyata d'shmaya, that godly, which is going to make them, that what they say is the ruling. I want to take this back all the way to one of the first conversations that we had in this course. If you remember, it was a very difficult case with Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, or Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Meisels in the Holocaust, and the father was trying to figure out whether he can or cannot redeem his baby. What does the father say to the rabbi? He's not asking him for the truth. He's just saying, tell me a halachic ruling, and then I will follow your ruling because I will have done what the Torah demands of me, which is ask a rabbi what to do and follow the way that the rabbi says. It turns out there's a very big holiness to that. There's a spiritual weight to that. When a rabbi gives a halachic ruling, even if you, with your brain, feel that his ruling is wrong, it doesn't make a difference. He has what today we call koach HaTorah. He has the power of the Torah, that we're following the Torah system, and therefore the halacha is the right way to go. And obviously, AI, which by its very nature, because it's not human beings, even if it's going to do identical to the rabbi every single time, AI will never have that divine desire that this is the way that we should go. This is the halacha. This is the path. This is the psak din, the way that's cut out for us that we should actually follow. So as a result, the limitations of AI are not just technical because it hasn't reached the right stage yet. It isn't technical because maybe AI will never be capable of following all the steps that the rabbi is supposed to follow. It is by its very core, by its very definition, a faulty method. Because an AI response is just a voice. It's not it doesn't have the spiritual power to a decision made with Torah backing based on the system that Hashem put in place for us. So to wrap up this conclusion about AI, does that mean that AI cannot play any role in halachic decision making? So we already know the answer to that. We already had a whole beginning where we said, no, there are a lot of things that AI maybe today can do already, and other things that maybe we'll have to wait until it's more advanced to be able to do. But it will never be as a halachic decider. It will always be as a tool. As a tool. Judaism always believes in living with the times. We don't believe I don't know if it's the Amish, the Mennonites, whatever it is, right? Who don't use technology because they believe that it's science is whatever. No. We believe in going with the times. We believe in applying the Torah always, over and over again, to the new technologies. So with AI, it won't replace a human being in terms of a spiritual role that Hashem has in place for a human being and for a rabbi and for all the different roles that there are, but it may end up being a huge tool. Not it may. It is already a huge tool for rabbis. I use AI all the time. which I hope is not scary to you. I hate to break it to you, your doctor is also using AI all the time. I know many doctors, they all tell me they use AI all the time. But it will never be used to replace the human element. It will always be used to assist the human being in making the decision that now needs to be made. So I'll use it, I'll check something up, etc. And then I'll be like, oh, that actually sounds like, this one sounds like the right one. Let me go look it up in Shulchan Aruch. I go look it up in Shulchan Aruch, and then you say we need a say. And there may come a time where I won't even need to look it up in Shulchan Aruch because it'll have gotten so accurate, whatever it is, right? And by the way, it's gotten better now than from a year ago. They're constantly learning, as we know. So I think that's a very that's the place that AI will play a role. Let's skip this one. We're going to skip text 10, which I think is just a little redundant. It's keeping me the same point. So AI can rule, but it can aid the rabbi. That's the point that we're saying. To conclude this course, I want to invite every single one of you to reflect on the journey that we have gone through over the past 6 weeks. I want you to appreciate where you were 6 weeks ago when you walked into this class. And I promised not only to take you into the world of captivating cases of rabbinic responsa, but first of all, to just whet your appetite, so that hopefully you understand that there are lots of rabbinic responsa out there that they provide so much for us. They provide a window into how the halachic system works. They provide fascinating insight into the way that Jews have interacted with halacha and with Torah throughout history. And I think this says a lot about who we are as a people. We aren't just a people that walks around willy-nilly making this. No, we believe that what we are engaged in is a spiritual endeavor to connect with Hashem, and not through one path of connecting to Hashem, but rather this last point that we made, that we can connect to Hashem in many different ways, and that many of them are valid. Even if they're not the halacha and the way that we follow, there might be a lesson from another way, or a spiritual significance to another way. And with this, we'll conclude today's lesson. I'd like to ask you to turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson, and then I'd like just 3 more minutes of your attention, if I may.
Lesson 6, Forging Forward. 1. Technological advancement is not foreign to the Torah, but woven into its very blueprint. Every innovation awaits our responsible and ethical use, aligning it with its original divine purpose. This mission lies at the heart of contemporary and futuristic rabbinic responsa. 2. One significant contemporary question is whether artificial intelligence can be used to render halakhic decisions. As it currently stands, AI hallucinates and, depending on the model, draws from sources that are outside the Torah framework. These limitations make it unsuitable for halachic guidance. 3. If AI were trained exclusively on valid Torah texts and equipped with safeguards against inaccuracy, it might be usable as a tool to convey basic halachic information. However, relaying information is not the same as issuing a ruling. A genuine halachic ruling arises when the answer is not clear-cut, when precedent is lacking, when sources disagree, or when conflicting values must be carefully weighed. These instances call for the ability to compare cases with nuance, to sense which values take precedence, and to respond not just to the question, but to the questioner. These are deeply human capacities. 4. Even if AI masters these techniques, it would still be disqualified from issuing halachic rulings. The Torah mandates that halachic rulings emerge through human deliberation. If even heavenly voices, miracles, and prophecy are excluded from halachic authority, then surely AI, no matter how refined, cannot assume that role. 5. The goal of Torah is not merely correct behavior, but a lived relationship with God, cultivated through consistent intellectual engagement with His wisdom and will. Relying on shortcuts for answers forfeits the sacred bond that comes from wrestling with Torah's complexities. 6. When a human being brings Torah to bear on new realities, divine wisdom fuses with human creativity. This sacred convergence fulfills the very purpose of creation. Turning to heaven or AI for answers undermines this valuable goal. 7. Like Rabbi Moshe of Kusi, who reconsidered a ruling after a dream, halachic experts may use AI as a prompt for reevaluation, but a human mind must weigh the issues, decide the outcome, and bear responsibility for the ruling. 8. Tools like AI may enhance our study of Torah, help us uncover new sources, or clarify difficult passages, but they must never reduce the time, effort, or devotion that characterize true engagement with God's wisdom.
Thank you all for joining us for Lesson 6. This has been Forging Forward, and with this we conclude our course, Captivating Cases in Rabbinic Responsa. I just want to have 3-4 minutes more of your time just to talk about 2 upcoming learning opportunities that I think specifically the people on this Zoom will be interested in. Number 1 is that this Thursday we are starting a new course called The Art of Marriage. This is not a self-help for marriage. It will obviously have tips on marriage, but it's not a self-help course. What it is, the tagline is how to add meaning to your love. In other words, Judaism views marriage, again, not as a means to an end. It's not meant to be, have a good marriage in order so that you can have children, so that you can, I don't know, whatever it is, right? No. Marriage is actually a means unto itself. There's something very meaningful about marriage from a Jewish perspective, and we're going to be talking about that over 6 weeks. The reason I think specifically this crowd would be interested in this is because of the format that we're using. It's not in the afternoon, and it's not in person. We're doing it only on Zoom, but it is late at night. It's 8:30 p.m., but only on Zoom. So that will be the whole experience only on Zoom. If you'd like to join us for it, please visit PasadenaJewishAcademy.com/JLI. And you can subscribe to that course, which is starting this Thursday. Again, if you do plan to join us, please let me know ASAP. Like that, I can get you registered. Now, if you're looking for another course that's exactly this format, in other words, 1 p.m. on Zoom, 7:30 p.m. in person, if you like that format, there's a new course that's coming up. That's the next course, which is after Pesach, after Passover. Please turn your attention. So I'll explain what it is first, and then we'll do a short video intro. The course is based on the idea that your Judaism holds a message the world wants to hear. Meaning, Judaism does not only contain messages for Jews, although it's primarily that, it also has a value system for non-Jews, for a universal value system, which applies to Jews and non-Jews. In this regard, I know people always quote the 7 Noahide laws, but first of all, in this course, we are going to touch on the 7 Noahide laws, and more importantly, we're going to explain exactly how you keep the 7 Noahide laws. But it's more than just the 7 Noahide laws. It's a value system that we're supposed to be communicating to the world. The problem is that many Jews that I know don't necessarily know how to do that. In other words, okay, I have a coworker, I'd love whatever they look like they do struggle with anger management issues. How do I communicate the value the values that Judaism feels this person should be following? So this is, I guess, as close as Judaism ever gets to conversion. You know what I mean? Famously, Judaism doesn't seek converts, but we do have an obligation to be a light unto the nations, to be a shining example for other people, but also to actively encourage them to be better people. What are those things? I know we're not supposed to put on tefillin with them. That part every rabbi throughout history has stressed for me, and I'm not supposed to try to get them to keep Shabbos. But what are the values that we're supposed to be imparting to them? I think it's time to unlock that. I think every one of us has that as part of our Yiddishkeit, as part of our Torah that we know, and this course is going to be attempting to answer that question. Please turn your attention to the video screens. For those that are interested, this course is also CLE accredited, as I think you saw. And if you'd like to register for this course, there's a 10% for both of these courses. Each of these courses, there's a 10% rollover discount. If you'd like to sign up for one of them or both of them, please, the easiest way is just to text me. Let me know you'd like to join for one or both of them, and I will get you registered for whichever it is that you want. Most of you, I think, have a card on file or something like that, and we'll get the 10% discount in. This 10% discount applies up until Purim. So this coming Monday night is going to be Purim, right? Is it Monday or Tuesday?
I think it's Tuesday.
Tuesday night, right? I don't know why I said Monday night. Give me a second. I'm going to check it right now.
Right.
March 2nd. It's Monday night. Monday night and Tuesday, March 2nd and 3rd is Purim. So by midnight between March 2nd and 3rd is when the promo code will expire and the 10% offer will expire for rollover students. So if you plan to join us for any of these upcoming courses, please let me know and we'll get you registered. Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.